And welcome to 4.2, solving with square roots. All right, so this lesson, this unit, we're basically talking about basically 4 ways to solve quadratics. Okay, 4.2 is kind of leads into 4.3, but this is kind of like a small section of that, just kind of builds on to 4.3. So anyways, today we're going to solve using square roots. I think you'll like this one, it's not too bad. So again, what is the fundamental theorem of algebra? Okay, so again, just a reminder in case you forgot. Again, this is kind of important. Might be important to memorize. Okay, so a polynomial with degree n has n solutions. Okay, so again, if we had something like 2x squared plus 3, okay, that is the degree is 2, so we have 2 solutions. Okay, if we had x to the 10th plus x equals 0, here we'd have 10 solutions. Okay, all right, so in this unit, we already talked about this, just a reminder, okay, since we're using quadratics, we will always have 2 solutions. So that will catch you, hopefully, if you accidentally write only one of the solutions. All right, so when you are given a solution or asked to solve an equation, you may want to consider using taking a square root. This strategy works best when, and this is kind of important too, because we're going to be talking about in the future, we're going to be kind of comparing like which methods work best for certain situations. So this is kind of important. It works best when there is only one x in your equation and it's squared. So basically there's not an x that doesn't have a square on it. Okay? So we'll kind of skip this part. Let's just solve a problem. Okay, so it says solve the following equations. X squared is equal to 25. So if we want to get x by itself, how do we get rid of the square? Well, we square root it. It's the opposite of squaring is a square root. So we would square root both sides. So that would give us x. And what does that give us? What's the square root of 25? And you'd say, well, that's just 5. Okay, and then you'd say, Mr. Warner, why is there only one solution? I thought you told me just barely that there is always 2 solutions for quadratics. Okay, we always have 2 solutions for quadratics. All right, so perhaps in the past you've talked about this, but whenever you square root, when solving, you're always going to have a plus and a minus. It's plus or minus the square root of 25. So anytime you have a square root to solve, anytime you use a square root to solve, you need to include a plus or minus. Okay, so that would give us plus and minus 5, or how I would prefer you write your solutions as x is equal to 5 comma negative 5. Okay, so we do have 2 solutions. All right, and how does that make sense? Okay, so if we had 5 squared, well, that does give us 25. Okay, if we were to plug that back into our original equation. But if we plug in a negative 5, well, that gives us negative 5 squared. Well, negative 5 times negative 5, that gives us a positive 25. So here there is 2 solutions, okay? A positive one and a negative. So that's the reason why we have plus or minuses. All right, here's another example. Okay, so if we wanted to solve for x, we would need to plus or minus the square root of 28. Okay, but hang on, can we simplify that? Let's try it. With factor tree, we can do 2 and 14. and then we could do 2 and 7. So a 2 comes out, so plus or minus 2 square roots of 7. Or x is equal to 2 square roots of 7 and negative 2 square roots of 7. And again, the order of those doesn't matter. If you had the negative first, that would be fine. All right, so give this one a try. Okay, so you're like, okay, I'll square root. And you'll say x, and you'd say, ooh, the square root of negative 10. Well, what's that? So remember, if we have a negative inside of a root, that's what gives us the imaginary. So we'd have I square roots of 10, and it would be plus or minus. So don't forget plus or minus. I almost did that. Okay? And then we would write it. And this is the main reason why I want you to write it this way, is because you will always, it will force you to write the two solutions. If you forgot the plus or minus, then you'd be like, oh yeah, I have to write two solutions. So here we have I square roots of 10 and negative I square roots of 10. All right. Okay, and basically we're going to add a little bit, because this is like one-step equation. Here we're going to do a two-step equation, a three-step equation. Okay, so we're just pulling off little layers by layer. Okay, so here the first thing we need to do to get x by itself, okay, we'd need to divide both sides by 5, because remember that 5 is not being squared. So here we'd get x squared is equal to, well, 250 or 200 or 125 divided by 5 is 25. Ooh, that gives us a nice number. And then we would do our square roots. So here we'd get x is equal to plus or minus 5, or x is equal to 5 comma negative 5. Okay. And please, I know you can do this in your head sometimes, at least some of the steps. Please write down all your steps. It doesn't take that much more time, but it helps make sure you don't have mistakes. Okay, so try B and C. So you kind of, hopefully you did that. X squared is equal to 2. And then you'd square root both sides. So here we end up getting x is equal to a positive square root of 2 and a negative square root of 2. Here we divide both sides by 4. That gives us x squared is equal to negative 1. We're going to square root both of those, plus or minus. So here we get x is equal to, well, what's the square root of a negative 1? We know that's I, so it would be I and negative I. So remember, I is equal to the square root of negative 1. All right, so let's take up on the next step, okay? So now we have something inside of our parentheses. We do it exactly the same. So here we would square root, because that whole thing is being squared, we'll square root the whole thing. Here we'd get x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 7. Okay, and this is where it's kind of going to be a little different, is now we're going to add 2 to both sides. Okay, common mistake is that people add those together and say, ooh, that's plus or minus 9. Okay, that would be a bad idea. So what it is x is 2 plus and minus 7. So that's going to give us two solutions, 2 plus 7 and 2 minus 7. So that gives us 9, and it gives us negative 5. So x is equal to 9 comma negative 5. So you need to do it that way, okay? You can't add it like that. Okay? Always put it in the front, plus or minus. All right, let's try these two by yourselves. Pause. Boop. All right, hopefully you got it. Okay, so here we'll square root. That cancels, gives us x plus 3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 18. If we did a factor tree for the square root of 18, that would give us 2 and 9 and 3 and 3. So we can take out a 3. So that's really x plus 3 equal to plus or minus 3 square roots of 2. And then we'll just subtract 3 from both sides. So x is equal to negative 3 plus or minus 3 square roots of 2. And again, I'd like you to write it twice. So 3 plus 3 square roots of 3 and negative 3 minus 3 square roots of 3. Okay, and remember, we can't combine these two together. This is rational and irrational. Okay, and I mean, you could combine them, but you'd get a decimal that never ends. So we'd want to keep our answer as precise as possible without having to round. All right, last but not least, here's another one. Okay, so x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of a negative 4. But wait, we know that the square root of 4 is 2, and we know that the square root inside would give us an I. So maybe we'll do that here. So we'll put that out as an I, so that would give us 2I. Subtract 1 from both sides, so we get x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus 2I, or x is negative 1 plus 2I, and negative 1 minus 2I. All right, okay, and then the shebang. Bring everything, this is everything all together. Okay, and then I'm going to have you guys practice some below, okay? So, again, I'm going to kind of talk about this right here. So the big idea for doing these problems is that we're going to solve for x by working backwards through PEMDAS. So, like, if we were to solve a problem like this, the first thing we'd want to do is, and I think the easier way to kind of think about this as what we want to move what is least attached to x. Okay, it's kind of like an onion. Okay, this is your x in the middle, and we want to keep the stuff that's closest to you, take off the stuff that's the furthest away from you first. Okay, so let's see if that makes sense. So here we have x. Okay, inside we have a negative 8. Okay, that's the closest to it, and then we have something squared that's a little further out, and then furthest out is the negative 5. So the first thing we're going to want to do is add 5 to both sides. So that gives us x minus 8 squared is equal to 4. And then the next thing out of your layers is the squared. So we'll square root x plus 8 is equal to plus or minus 2. And then the last thing, like the best friend of x, is going to be 8. So we'll subtract 8 from both sides, and we'll end up getting x is equal to negative 8 plus or minus 2. Okay, and I'm going to require you that you simplify as far as you can. So here we'd want to do negative 8 plus 2, and that gives you negative 6. And then you'll do negative 8 minus 2, which gives you negative 10. So our solution is going to be negative 6, comma, negative 10. All right. So pause. I feel like I don't need to go over all these problems. Maybe I'll make it as a separate video if you wanted more examples, okay? So pause and do B and C. Okay. So here we're doing our onions. What's furthest away is going to be this 10. So we'll add 10. Gives us 3x squared is equal to 162. And then next, again, that 3 is not under that exponent, so we'll need to divide both sides by 3. X squared is equal to, well, what's 162 divided by 3? It's 54. And then we will square root both sides. We'll get x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 54. When we want to check and see if we have if we can simplify the radicals. So here we could do 2 and 54 divided by 2 gives you 27. And 27, you can divide that by 3. And 9. And 3 and 3. So here's a group of 3's. Again, we're only using the primes. So that gives us 3 square roots of whatever 2 times 3 is, gives you 6. Okay, so your solution is going to be 3 square roots of 6 and negative 3 square roots of 6. All right, and last but not least, okay, so layers, take off the layers. So subtract 5. That gives us, what would that give us? 16. And then we'll divide both sides by 4. X plus 4 squared is equal to 4. We'll square root. X plus 4 is equal to plus or minus 2. And then we will subtract 4. So x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus 2. That's going to give us 2 solutions. One is negative 4 plus 2. That gives us negative 2. And negative 4 minus 2 gives us negative 6. So our solution is x is equal to negative 2 and negative 6. All right, so I think that's about it. I don't know if we necessarily need to go over those. Again, I will do this on a separate video. If you have questions, please let me know. And good luck.